Blood soaked through the white bandages wrapped around Silas Blackwood's chest, spreading like a map of a war that had not yet ended. He stood in the doorway of the log cabin, his rifle still warm in his hands, his steel-gray eyes piercing through the darkness toward the shadows of men retreating down the mountain. Behind him inside the cabin, Clara stood by the window. The woman he had not even known 3 weeks ago now held a Colt revolver in her small hands, the same weapon he had taught her to use. Her dress was stained with blood that was not her own, and her blue eyes no longer held any trace of fear. "He will come back," she said, her voice steady in a way that surprised even her. "I know." Silas lowered his rifle. "And next time he will bring an army." "How long?" 2 days. Maybe 3 if the storm does not clear." He turned to look at her, this woman who had transformed his entire existence in less than a month. "You could run. I could hold them here long enough for you to escape." "No." Clara crossed the room and placed her hand on his wounded arm. "I chose you. I am not running." Silas Blackwood, 52 years old, a veteran of the Civil War, a man who had lived alone on this mountain for 12 years because he believed no one could ever accept him, looked into Clara Whitmore's eyes and saw something he had abandoned, hope of ever finding a future. But to claim that future, they would have to survive tonight, and the night after, and the battle that would follow. This is the story of how it all began. 3 weeks earlier, the morning sun cast long shadows across the main street of Pinewood Creek, Montana. It was October of 1887, and the mountain air carried the first bite of the coming winter. Clara Whitmore stood behind the counter of Thompson's General Store, arranging tobacco tins while trying desperately not to look out the window, not to look at him. Silas Blackwood stood in the middle of the dusty street, deep in conversation with old Mr. Thompson. Even from this distance, Clara could feel the weight of his presence. He stood nearly 2 meters tall, his shoulders broad as oak beams, his hands large enough to crush a man's skull without effort. A thick black beard covered half of his angular face, streaked with gray at the edges, and those eyes of his, those steel-gray eyes, seemed capable of seeing through anything and anyone. People called him the Mountain Man. He came down from his cabin only once a month to purchase supplies, and no one knew exactly where on the Bitterroot Range he made his home. No one dared to ask, and absolutely no one approached him unless absolutely necessary. But Clara could not stop watching. She had been watching him for 6 months now, ever since her grandmother, the only family she had left in this world, had passed away peacefully in her sleep. Something about him drew her gaze like a moth to flame something she could not name and did not understand. Her heart raced faster as she observed him through the dusty glass. Her cheeks flushed with heat. There was an ache, a strange and unfamiliar ache somewhere low in her body that she had never experienced before, an ache that intensified every time she caught sight of him. Clara Whitmore was 22 years old, and she was discovering that she knew nothing about herself. Nothing at all. She had been orphaned at the age of 8 when both her parents succumbed to typhoid fever during the epidemic that swept through Kansas. Her grandmother Martha Whitmore had brought her to Montana to start a new life far from the painful memories of what they had lost. Grandmother Martha was a strict woman, deeply religious, who believed that a woman's purity was the most precious gift she could offer her husband on their wedding night, a hunger that frightened her as much as it fascinated her. The bell above the door chimed, and Clara's breath caught in her throat as Mrs. Patterson entered the store. The woman was the biggest gossip in Pinewood Creek, and her sharp eyes immediately found Clara standing near the window, her gaze fixed on something outside. "Clara Whitmore, what are you staring at out there?" Mrs. Patterson demanded, her voice carrying through the small shop. "Nothing, ma'am." Clara quickly stepped back behind the counter, her cheeks burning. "Just checking the window display." Mrs. Patterson's eyes narrowed with speculation. She walked closer to Clara, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "You know Silas Blackwood is out there right now. He came down from the mountain today, first time this month. People say he is looking for something, or perhaps someone." Clara felt her face grow even hotter. "I do not concern myself with rumors, Mrs. Patterson." "No," the older woman laughed. "Then perhaps you have not heard the story of Rebecca." "Rebecca, his bride, from 12 years ago in Silver Falls." Mrs. Patterson's voice dropped even lower, as though she were telling a ghost story. On their wedding night she saw him, all of him, and she screamed like she had seen the devil himself. Clara swallowed hard. "I do not understand." "Oh, you innocent thing." Mrs. Patterson shook her head. "Did your grandmother teach you nothing? Men are built differently than women, Clara, and Silas Blackwood is a large man in every sense of the word. Far too large, they say, for any normal woman to accommodate." "That cannot be true." "It is true enough." Rebecca ran from that bedroom and never looked back. Left town the very next morning. And Silas Blackwood has lived alone on that mountain ever since, convinced that no decent woman could ever accept what he is. Mrs. Patterson leaned even closer, her eyes gleaming with the pleasure of sharing scandal. "He calls himself a monster deer." And after Rebecca spread the story to half the county, everyone else started calling him that too. Clara stood frozen behind the counter, her mind reeling. She did not fully understand what Mrs. Patterson meant by too large, but her body seemed to understand. Heat pooled between her legs, a sensation she had never experienced with such intensity before. "Now then," Mrs. Patterson said, her tone becoming businesslike, "I need 3 yards of calico and a spool of blue thread." Clara served her mechanically, her hands moving through familiar motions while her thoughts churned. When Mrs. Patterson finally left, the store fell silent, but Clara's mind was anything but quiet. She found herself thinking about Silas Blackwood, about the story Mrs. Patterson had told, about the strange hunger awakening inside her that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. The bell chimed again, and this time Silas Blackwood himself stepped through the door. He had to duck his head to pass through the frame, and when he straightened to his full height, Clara felt as though all the air had been sucked from the room. He wore a leather coat over a dark shirt, thick trousers tucked into heavy boots, and a wide-brimmed hat that cast shadows across his weathered face. He smelled of pine forest and tanned leather and wood smoke, the scent of the mountain of freedom, of something wild and primal. "Miss Whitmore." His voice was deep as distant thunder, resonating through the small space of the store. "Mr. Blackwood." Clara forced her voice to remain steady despite the racing of her heart. "How may I help you today?" "I need some supplies." He read out a short list: tobacco, salt, ammunition, soap. Clara gathered each item with trembling hands, acutely aware of his eyes following her every movement. When she placed the items on the counter and announced the total, their fingers brushed as he handed her the coins. A bolt of electricity shot through Clara's body. She gasped sharply, her eyes flying up to meet his. And when she looked into those steel-gray eyes, she saw something that mirrored her own confusion, something dark and intense and carefully controlled. "Is something wrong, Miss Whitmore?" His voice was rougher than before, carefully measured. "No, nothing. I am just tired. It has been a long day." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. Silas studied her for a long moment, his gaze penetrating in a way that made Clara feel exposed, as though he could see every improper thought she had ever had about him. Then he nodded slowly. "You should be careful." He picked up his parcels and turned toward the door. "Edgar Thornton is not a good man, and his father is worse." Clara blinked in surprise. "How do you know about Edgar Thornton?" But Silas was already gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click, leaving Clara alone with her racing heart and 1,000 unanswered questions. She did not have to wait long for those questions to multiply. 30 minutes later, the bell chimed once more, and the atmosphere in the store changed completely. Edgar Thornton entered like a man who owned the world. He was the son of the wealthiest banker in Pinewood Creek, 30 years old, handsome in the polished way of city men. But there was something in his eyes that made Clara want to step backward, a cold calculation like a snake sizing up its prey. "Clara." He smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. "I have been speaking with my father about you." "Mr. Thornton, I do not think this is appropriate." Edgar. Call me Edgar." He stepped closer, too close. "You know a young woman like yourself should not be living alone. It is not safe. It is not proper." "I am managing quite well, thank you." "Are you—" His eyes flickered with something dark. "My father owns the mortgage on the house your grandmother left you. Did you know that—" Clara felt ice form in her veins. "That is a lie. My grandmother never mentioned any debt." "Perhaps she did not want to worry you." Edgar stepped even closer, and Clara could smell his cologne cloying and suffocating. "But the documents are real, Clara. And if you cannot pay what is owed within 2 weeks, you will lose everything." "I do not believe you." "Believe what you wish." His smile turned predatory. "But there is a simple solution. Become my wife, and the debt disappears. The house becomes yours. You will be cared for, protected, respected." "I do not want to marry you." Something dangerous flickered in Edgar's eyes. "You will change your mind." Women always change their minds when they realize their position. He reached out and touched her cheek, a gesture that might have seemed affectionate but felt like a brand of ownership. Clara jerked away. "Please leave." "1 week, Clara. That is all the time you have to make the right decision." He put on his hat and walked toward the door, pausing at the threshold to look back at her. "And do not think about running. The Thornton family's influence extends far beyond this little town." He left, and Clara stood alone behind the counter, her hands gripping the wooden edge so tightly that her knuckles turned white. 1 week to lose her home. 1 week to choose between poverty and a prison disguised as marriage. And somewhere on the mountain above, a man that everyone called a monster, who had looked at her today with eyes that held something she could not name. That night, Clara lay in her bed and could not sleep. She thought about Edgar and his threats, about the debt that might or might not exist, about the dark future that awaited her if she was forced to marry a man she despised. But above all, she thought about Silas Blackwood, about the story Mrs. Patterson had told, about those steel-gray eyes, about the electric shock that had passed through her body when their fingers touched awakening something that had been sleeping inside her for 22 years. She wanted to know. She wanted to understand why her body reacted the way it did. She wanted to understand what Mrs. Patterson's whispers truly meant. She wanted to understand why Rebecca had run away and whether she herself would run too. And more than anything, she wanted power. The power to face Edgar Thornton, the power to control her own destiny, the power that came from knowledge, the knowledge her grandmother had hidden from her all her life. Clara sat up in bed. She changed into her finest blue dress, the one her grandmother had sewn for her 2 years ago. She let her honey blonde hair down loose around her shoulders, and before she could change her mind, she stepped out into the night, heading toward the mountain. She did not know exactly where Silas Blackwood's cabin stood, but she had heard people speak of a large stream about 2 hours' walk from town and a log cabin somewhere beyond it higher up the mountain. She climbed, in the darkness, alone. The path was treacherous, lit only by the full moon overhead. Clara stumbled over roots and rocks, her dress catching on brambles, her feet aching in her inadequate shoes. More than once she considered turning back. But she did not turn back, because somewhere above her was a man who might have the answers she needed. A man who, according to every story she had heard, was just as lonely as she was. A man who had been called a monster for 12 years because one frightened woman had not been able to accept what he was. Clara was determined not to be that woman. Nearly 3 hours later, exhausted and shivering, she found the cabin. It was larger than she had imagined, solidly built from thick logs, smoke rising from the chimney into the cold night air. Warm light glowed through the windows, and for a moment Clara simply stood there gathering her courage. Then she stepped onto the porch and raised her hand to knock. The door flew open before her knuckles could touch the wood, and she found herself staring into the barrel of a rifle. "Who is there?" Silas Blackwood's voice roared through the darkness. "Clara Whitmore, from the store." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Please do not shoot me." Silence stretched between them, long and terrible. Then the rifle lowered, and Silas stepped into the moonlight. He was not wearing a shirt. His bare chest revealed muscles that rippled despite his 52 years, and a long scar, a relic of war, ran from his shoulder down across his heart. His dark hair was disheveled, his gray eyes sharp as knife blades. "Are you insane?" he demanded, his voice a growl. "Do you know how dangerous it is to climb this mountain alone at night? There are bears, there are wolves, there are men far worse than any wild animal." "I know." Clara lifted her chin, forcing herself not to tremble. "But I needed to speak with you, and I could not do it in town where everyone would see and gossip." Silas stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Come inside," he finally said, "before you freeze to death." The interior of the cabin was warmer and neater than Clara had expected. A large fireplace dominated one wall, flames crackling within. A wide bed covered with fur blankets occupied one corner. A work table scattered with maps and ledgers stood against another wall. Animal traps and furs hung from the rafters. Silas handed her a wool blanket and gestured toward a chair near the fire. Clara wrapped herself in the blanket's warmth and sat down, suddenly aware of how foolish this entire venture was. She was alone in a cabin with a man she barely knew, a man everyone called a monster, in the middle of the night on a remote mountain. If anything happened to her, no one would ever know. But when she looked at Silas Blackwood standing across the room with his arms crossed over his bare chest, she did not feel fear. She felt something else entirely. "Speak," he said, his voice flat. "What do you want?" Clara took a deep breath and gathered every ounce of courage she possessed. "I want you to teach me." "Teach you what?" "About what happens between a man and a woman." The words hung in the air like smoke. Silas's jaw tightened. "You should not be asking a man questions like that in his cabin in the middle of the night." "Then where should I ask them? Who should I ask?" Clara felt tears of frustration prick at her eyes. "My grandmother is dead. My mother died when I was a child. I have no one, Mr. Blackwood, no one at all. And now Edgar Thornton is trying to force me to marry him within a week. He wants to own me, to use my body in ways I do not understand, and I have no way to resist because I do not even know if I have the right to refuse." The mention of Edgar's name made something dark flash in Silas's eyes. "Thornton is pressuring you. He claims his father owns the mortgage on my house. 1 week, he said. If I do not agree to marry him, I lose everything." Clara wiped at her tears angrily. "But I would rather lose my home than belong to a man I did not choose. I just need to understand. I need to know what I am facing." Silas turned away, walking to the window to stare out at the darkness. "You have heard the stories about me." It was not a question. "About Rebecca?" "Yes." "And you still came here?" "I am not afraid of you." Clara stood crossing the room to stand closer to him. "When I look at you, I do not see a monster. I see a man who has been hurt, like me." Silas turned back to face her, and in his eyes Clara saw the war being fought within him, desire against fear, loneliness against responsibility. "If I teach you," he said slowly, "there is no going back. You will change. Everything will change." "I do not want to go back." Clara met his gaze without flinching. "I want to move forward." Silas closed his eyes as though praying or perhaps cursing fate itself. "Tonight I will take you home safely. But if you still want this after you have had time to think clearly, come back tomorrow night, and we will begin." He opened his eyes, and Clara saw the fire within them controlled but burning fiercely. "Do you understand what you are asking for, Clara Whitmore?" "I am asking for knowledge," she said simply. "I am asking for the power to control my own life. I am asking you to treat me like a woman capable of making her own choices, not a child who needs to be protected from the truth." For a long moment Silas simply looked at her, this small, brave woman who had climbed a mountain alone in the darkness just to find him. "You may be the most courageous person I have ever met," he said quietly, "or the most foolish." "Perhaps both," Clara replied. "But I am tired of being neither." Silas almost smiled. "Almost. Tomorrow night," he said. "If you still feel this way, we will begin." He led her down the mountain as dawn broke over the peaks, walking in silence through the pine forest. He did not touch her, maintaining a careful distance between them, but Clara could feel his eyes on her back the entire way, watchful and protective like a wolf guarding its pack. When they reached the edge of town, Silas stopped. "Go home. Rest. Think." His voice was stern. "If you wake up tomorrow and realize that last night was nothing but momentary madness, I will understand. No one will judge you. And if I still want to come—" His gray eyes met hers, and in that moment Clara saw the fire within him, the flame he had kept banked for 12 long years. "Then bring something warm to wear for the journey home. Nights on the mountain are colder than you imagine." Then he turned and vanished into the forest shadows as though he had never existed at all. Clara walked home through the empty streets, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. She should have felt exhausted. She should have felt foolish. She should have felt ashamed of her impropriety. Instead, she felt alive. For the first time in 22 years, Clara Whitmore felt truly, completely alive. And she knew with a certainty that surprised her that she would return to that mountain tomorrow night. Not because she had no other choice, but because she wanted to. Because she had finally found someone who did not treat her like a child, who did not try to protect her from the truth, who looked at her and saw a woman capable of making her own decisions. Because for one brief moment, when their eyes had met across that fire-lit cabin, Clara had seen something in Silas Blackwood that mirrored her own loneliness. And she was determined to understand what that meant, even if it changed everything, even if there was no going back. Meanwhile, in a different part of Pinewood Creek, Edgar Thornton paced his father's study, his face flushed with anger. "She was not home last night," he said. "I had someone watching. She went somewhere up the mountain." Cornelius Thornton, a man of 58 with eyes like cold stone, tapped his fingers against his mahogany desk. "The mountain, only one person lives on that mountain. Silas Blackwood." "Interesting." A cold smile spread across Cornelius's lips. "She is going to visit the monster. This could work in our favor." "How?" "If the town discovers that Clara Whitmore is climbing the mountain to meet a man like Blackwood at night, her reputation will be destroyed. She will have no choice but to marry you unless she wants to live as a ruined woman." Edgar's eyes gleamed. "Father, you are a genius." "No, my son. I am simply a man who understands how power works." Cornelius leaned back in his leather chair. "Watch her. Follow her. And when the time is right, we will use what we learn to ensure she has nowhere left to run." "And Blackwood? Let the monster enjoy his fantasy while it lasts. When we are done, Clara Whitmore will belong to you, and Silas Blackwood will lose the only thing he has allowed himself to care about in 12 years. Edgar smiled, a predator scenting blood. "I will make the arrangements." "Good." Cornelius picked up his brandy and swirled it thoughtfully. From somewhere upstairs a door closed quietly. Neither Cornelius nor Edgar noticed, but Jake Thornton, the elder son, who had always been uncomfortable with his family's methods, had heard every word. Outside the window, the sun continued to rise over Pinewood Creek, casting long shadows across the dusty streets. And on the mountain above, in a cabin surrounded by pine forest and silence, Silas Blackwood sat before his fire and thought about a woman with honey-blonde hair and eyes like the summer sky. A woman who had not flinched when she saw his scars. A woman who had not run when she heard the stories. A woman who had looked at him and said, "I am not afraid of you." He did not know if she would return tonight. But for the first time in 12 years, Silas Blackwood allowed himself to hope. And that hope, he knew, was either the beginning of his salvation or the final piece of his destruction. Only time would tell which. The following night, Clara climbed the mountain again. This time she carried a small bag with warm clothes exactly as Silas had instructed. The path felt less treacherous now that she knew where she was going, and the full moon illuminated the way through the pine forest like a silver lantern hung by some benevolent god. When she reached the cabin, Silas was waiting at the door. Not with a rifle this time, but with an expression that held equal parts anticipation and caution. "You came back," he said. "I told you I would." He studied her face in the moonlight, searching for doubt or hesitation. Finding none, he stepped aside. "Come in." The cabin was warm, the fire already blazing in the hearth. Clara noticed that things had been rearranged since the night before. The space was cleaner, more welcoming. And on the rough-hewn table sat a small vase of wildflowers, purple and white, their delicate petals catching the firelight. Such a small gesture, such an enormous meaning. "Before we begin," Silas said, standing across from her with his arms crossed, "there are rules." Clara nodded, her heart hammering. "First, I will not do anything you do not want. If you say stop, I stop. No exceptions." "I understand." "Second, we go slowly. Your body has never experienced this. I will not risk hurting you because of impatience." "I understand." "Third," his gray eyes found hers intense and unwavering, "if we do this, if I touch you, if I teach you, you will be mine. I do not share what belongs to me." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks, but not from embarrassment. There was something primal in his declaration, something that should have frightened her, but instead made her feel protected, claimed, safe. "And will you be mine?" she asked quietly. Surprise flickered across his face. Then slowly the ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Fair enough. Yes, Clara Whitmore, I will be yours." He crossed the room and stood before her so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. His large hand rose slowly, giving her time to pull away, and then his fingers touched her cheek with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a man of his size. "This is the first lesson," he said, his voice low. "Touch." He traced the line of her jaw with his fingertips, feather light. Then down her neck, along the sensitive hollow of her throat, where her pulse beat rapid and wild. "Every person is different," he explained. "Every woman has places that respond more than others. The back of the ear, the inside of the wrist, the curve of the waist." His fingers demonstrated each point as he spoke, and Clara felt shivers cascading down her spine. A good man learns his woman's body. He does not assume he knows what she needs. He asks. He explores. He pays attention. "Is that what you are doing?" Clara's voice came out breathless. "Paying attention. I am memorizing you." His hand moved to cup the back of her neck, tilting her face up toward his. "Every breath, every shiver, every sound you make." He kissed her. It was nothing like the chaste pecks Clara had read about in her grandmother's approved books. His mouth claimed hers with a hunger that stole her breath, his tongue parting her lips to explore and taste. Clara gasped against him, her hands flying up to grip his shoulders for balance as her knees threatened to give way. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. "That," Silas said roughly, "is a kiss. Not the polite nonsense they teach in parlors. A real kiss. The kind that makes a woman forget her own name." "I think I have forgotten," Clara whispered. "You may need to remind me." His laugh was low and surprised, as though he had forgotten how to laugh and was rediscovering the sensation. "Tomorrow," he said, stepping back with visible effort. "We continue tomorrow. But I want more." "I know." His gray eyes were dark with restrained desire. "So do I. But if we move too fast, you will be overwhelmed. I want you to savor each new sensation before we add another." Clara wanted to argue. Every fiber of her being wanted to argue, but she recognized the wisdom in his words even if her body protested. "Tomorrow night," she agreed, "I will walk you down the mountain. You do not need to escort me every time." "Yes, I do." His voice left no room for argument. "Until you know this mountain as well as I do, I will not let you travel it alone in the dark." In another man, such words might have felt controlling. From Silas they felt like a promise. At the same moment in the study of the Thornton mansion, a very different conversation was taking place. "She went up the mountain again," Edgar reported, his face twisted with barely contained rage. "My man followed her to the tree line, but could not keep up in the dark. Cornelius Thornton swirled his brandy candlelight, catching the amber liquid. So she is visiting Blackwood regularly now. Fascinating." Fascinating father, she is supposed to be my wife, and instead she is climbing mountains to spread her legs for some savage. Watch your tongue. Cornelius's voice cracked like a whip. And use your brain for once. This is not a disaster. This is an opportunity. How? The story writes itself, Edgar. An innocent young woman, orphaned and vulnerable, seduced by the notorious mountain monster. When the town learns of her nighttime visits, she will be ruined. No respectable man will have her. No business will employ her. Her only option will be to accept your generous offer of marriage, which will appear to everyone as an act of Christian mercy. Edgar's eyes widened as understanding dawned. We destroy her reputation first. Precisely. But we must time it correctly. Let her dig her grave a little deeper. Let there be more visits, more evidence, and when the moment is right, we expose her shame to the entire town. And Blackwood? Cornelius smiled a cold expression that held no warmth. That beast has been a thorn in my side for years. Owns land I want, refuses to sell. Once Clara is yours, we will deal with him separately. Perhaps an accident on the mountain. Perhaps a visit from men who know how to handle difficult problems. You would have him killed. I would remove an obstacle. Cornelius drained his brandy. The Thorntons did not build an empire by being squeamish, son. Remember that. Edgar nodded slowly, his face hardening with resolve. I will keep watching and waiting. Good. Patience is a virtue, Edgar, especially when destroying one's enemies. Outside the window, storm clouds were gathering over the mountains, a fitting omen for the darkness that was coming. The third night, Clara returned to learn about desire. Silas undressed her slowly, reverently, each button and ribbon removed with careful deliberation. She stood before him in only her thin chemise firelight, dancing across her skin, feeling vulnerable and powerful all at once. You are beautiful, he said, and the raw honesty in his voice made her believe it. More beautiful than any woman I have ever seen. I am ordinary. There is nothing ordinary about you, Clara Whitmore. He traced the curve of her shoulder through the thin fabric. You climbed a mountain alone in the darkness to find a man everyone calls a monster. You looked me in the eye and said you were not afraid. Ordinary women do not do such things. Perhaps I am simply foolish. Perhaps you are simply brave. He bent to press his lips to the curve of her neck. Let me show you what your body can feel. He taught her about pleasure that night, about the places on her own body that could bring her to heights she had never imagined. His hands were patient and skilled, exploring her responses with the attention of a scholar studying sacred texts. When the first wave of ecstasy crashed over her, Clara cried out his name, her body trembling, tears streaming down her face from the sheer intensity of sensation. Are you all right? Silas asked immediately, concern flooding his features. Did I hurt you? No. She laughed through her tears. I did not know. I did not know it could feel like that. That is what your body was designed to feel. He pulled her into his arms, cradling her against his chest. That is what a good man gives his woman, not just his own satisfaction. Hers first. Always hers first. Did you feel anything? I felt everything. His voice was rough. Watching you, hearing you, knowing I was the one giving you that pleasure. There is no greater feeling in the world. Show me how to give you the same feeling. Not yet. He kissed her forehead. First you learn to receive. Then you learn to give. We have time. But time, as Clara was about to discover, was not on their side. The fourth night brought truth. Silas sat beside the fire, his face shadowed, and finally told Clara the full story of Rebecca. I was 40 years old when I met her, fresh from years of wandering after the war. His voice was heavy with old pain. I had killed men, Clara, many men, in battle and after. I thought I had lost the capacity to love anyone. Clara listened in silence, sensing that he needed to tell this story as much as she needed to hear it. Rebecca was young like you, 22, beautiful and gentle. She said she loved me despite my past. We were engaged within 3 months. He paused, staring into the flames. I thought I had finally found redemption. What happened? Our wedding night happened. Silas's jaw tightened. When I undressed, when she saw me, saw all of me, she screamed, like I was a monster, like I was going to tear her apart. But you had not even touched her. No, I never touched her, never got the chance. His voice was bitter as ash. She ran from that room, from that house, from that town. And by morning, everyone in Silver Falls knew that Silas Blackwood was a beast who could not control his animal urges. But that was not true. Truth does not matter when stories spread faster than fire. He turned to look at Clara, and she saw 12 years of pain in his eyes. I came to this mountain because here no one judges me. Here I cannot hurt anyone, and here I convinced myself I did not need anyone. Clara moved closer to him, placing her hand over his. Then I will tell you a different truth, she said softly. When I look at you, I see the gentlest man I have ever known. When you touch me, I feel safe, not afraid. And when you tell me about Rebecca, I feel angry at her for hurting you, not afraid of what she saw. You do not know what she saw. Then show me. Silas went very still. Clara, I need to see. I need to understand. She squeezed his hand. I will not run. I promise you that. Whatever you show me, I will still be here in the morning. For a long moment he simply looked at her. Then with hands that trembled slightly, he began to unfasten his clothing. When Clara saw him, truly saw him, she understood. He was enormous, larger than anything she could have imagined. The sight should have terrified her, should have sent her running just as Rebecca had run all those years ago. Instead she felt curiosity, and heat, and a strange, fierce determination. You are not a monster, she said quietly. You are simply a man who needs a woman brave enough to learn how to receive him. You cannot possibly accommodate this. No woman can. Rebecca could not. Clara stepped closer. But I am not Rebecca, and you have already taught me that my body is capable of things I never imagined. She looked up at him, meeting his tortured gaze. Teach me this too, Silas. Teach me how to welcome you. The sound that escaped him was half groan, half prayer. You will be the death of me, Clara Whitmore, or perhaps the life of you. She placed her hand over his heart. Let me decide which. The 5th night he began to prepare her. It was not romantic, not in the conventional sense. It was clinical and careful and necessary. Silas explaining every step, every sensation, ensuring she understood what her body needed to learn. The female body is remarkably adaptable, he said, his voice steady, even as his hands worked with devastating intimacy. It was designed to birth children far larger than anything I could give you. The issue is not capability, it is preparation. Clara breathed through the initial discomfort, focusing on his words, on his patience, on the care he took with her. This is why Rebecca was afraid, he continued. No one had prepared her. No one had told her what was possible. She saw me and imagined pain, not pleasure, but it does not have to be that way. How long will this take? As long as it needs to. He kissed her temple gently. I will not rush this. I will not hurt you. Night after night he worked with her. Patient, methodical, always attuned to her responses, always stopping when she needed rest, always ensuring that she felt pleasure along with the stretching sensations. And slowly, Clara felt her body learning to accept what had seemed impossible. A week passed. Clara continued working at the general store during the days, maintaining the appearance of normalcy while her entire world transformed in secret. She saw the way people looked at her, the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room, Mrs. Patterson's knowing glances, the barely concealed smirks of the women who had already heard rumors. But she did not care. Let them whisper. Let them judge. She had found something real, something true, and no amount of gossip could diminish it. Then Edgar Thornton appeared in the store again. Clara. His voice dripped with false sweetness. You look tired these days, not sleeping well. I am fine, Mr. Thornton. Edgar. He leaned against the counter too close as always. I have been hearing interesting things about you, about where you spend your nights. Clara's blood ran cold, but she kept her face neutral. I do not know what you mean. No, because several people have mentioned seeing you walking toward the mountain after dark. Every night, in fact." His smile was pure venom. "What could possibly be drawing you up there, I wonder?" "That is none of your concern." "Everything about you is my concern." Edgar grabbed her wrist, his fingers digging in painfully. "You were supposed to be my wife, Clara. You were supposed to say yes days ago. Instead, you have been climbing that mountain to visit a monster. Let go of me." "Or what you will call for help. Who will come? Everyone already thinks you are a whore, Clara, a pure girl from a good family spreading her legs for the beast everyone warned her about." "I said, let go." The voice came from the doorway, deep and cold as winter ice. Silas Blackwood stood there, filling the frame with his massive form. He had come down from the mountain in daylight, something he almost never did, and his gray eyes blazed with fury. Edgar released Clara's wrist and stumbled backward. "Blackwood, this is between me and my intended bride." "She is not your bride." Silas stepped inside, and Clara could see Edgar physically shrink back. "She is mine, and if you ever touch her again, I will break every bone in your body. You are threatening the son of the most powerful man in this county. I am promising consequences to a coward who forces himself on women." Silas's voice was terrifyingly calm. "Leave now, and do not come near her again." Edgar fled, but not before throwing one last venomous look at Clara. "This is not over," he hissed. "This is far from over." When he was gone, Clara sagged against the counter, her legs suddenly weak. "Thank you," she began, but Silas cut her off. "We need to leave, now." "What?" "Thornton will not stop. He has power in this town, connections, money. You are not safe here anymore." Silas took her hands in his. "Come with me. To the mountain. Marry me." "Marry you?" Clara's head spun. "But we have only known each other a few weeks." I know it is insane. But I have lived alone for 12 years, convinced that no one could ever accept me. Then you appeared brave and proud and unafraid." His voice cracked slightly. "You gave me hope, Clara. Do not let me lose you now. Edgar will come after us. His father will not stop until he destroys you. Let them try." Silas cupped her face in his enormous hands. "On my mountain their laws mean nothing. Their power means nothing. Up there I can protect you. I can keep you safe. And I can spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." Clara looked at this man who stood before her, 52 years old, a veteran of terrible wars, called a monster by everyone who had heard his story, and yet he had treated her with more kindness, more patience, more genuine care than anyone she had ever known. "Yes," she said, "I will marry you, Silas Blackwood." He kissed her, then, fierce and desperate and full of promises, right there in the middle of the general store where anyone might see. Clara did not care. Let them all see. Let the whole world know. She had made her choice. 3 days later, Reverend Thomas Reynolds climbed the mountain to perform the ceremony. He was an elderly man with kind eyes and no interest in the gossip from Pinewood Creek. A minister from Silver Falls, the neighboring town, who believed that love was a gift from God, regardless of what form it took. "Marriage is a sacred bond," he said, standing before Silas and Clara in front of the cabin, the mountain wilderness serving as their cathedral. "It is not about wealth or status or the approval of society. It is about two souls choosing to face the world together." Clara wore a simple white dress that Silas had secretly commissioned from a seamstress in Silver Falls. She had cried when she discovered it laid out on the bed that morning, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. Silas wore his only black suit, his hair neatly combed, his beard trimmed. He looked nothing like the frightening mountain man everyone feared. He looked like a man in love. "Do you, Silas Blackwood, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "And do you, Clara Whitmore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Silas kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache, and Clara knew that whatever trials lay ahead, she had made the right choice. The Reverend departed shortly after, making his way back down the mountain before dark. Silas and Clara were finally alone, finally married, finally free to complete what they had started. "Are you ready?" Silas asked as night fell and firelight filled the cabin. "I have been ready for days." He undressed her with the same reverence he had shown throughout their courtship, each layer removed with worshipful care. And when she lay before him in the firelight completely bare, he looked at her as though she were the most precious thing in the world. "I love you, Clara Blackwood." It was the first time either of them had said those words. "I love you too, Silas." He prepared her one final time, ensuring she was ready, ensuring she was relaxed. And when he finally positioned himself, when he finally began to join with her, Clara breathed through the sensation of being stretched beyond anything she had experienced before. "Look at me," he commanded gently. "Breathe with me." She did, her eyes locked on his, their breaths synchronizing as he advanced slowly, carefully, inch by inch. There was pressure. There was stretching. There was a moment of sharp pain when her maidenhead gave way. But through it all there was also Silas, watching her face, stopping when she needed him to stop, whispering words of encouragement. And then finally, impossibly, he was fully seated within her. "You did it." He breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "You took all of me." Clara felt tears streaming down her face, but they were not tears of pain. They were tears of triumph, of connection, of finally being complete. "Move," she whispered. "Please, Silas. I need to feel you move." He did, slowly at first, then with increasing intensity as her body adjusted, as pleasure began to overtake the initial discomfort. And when the wave finally crested, when Clara screamed his name, as ecstasy crashed through her, she felt him follow, felt the heat of his release deep inside her. They lay tangled together afterward, breathing hard, skin slick with sweat. "Are you all right?" Silas asked, concern evident despite his obvious satisfaction. "I am perfect." Clara laughed, a sound of pure joy. "I am absolutely perfect. No regrets. Not a single one." She kissed him softly. "Only gratitude for your patience, for your kindness, for seeing me when no one else did." "You saw me first," he reminded her. "You looked at a monster and saw a man. Because that is all you ever were, all you ever are." She snuggled closer to him. "My man, my husband." Outside the cabin the wind had picked up, howling through the pines. A storm was coming. Neither of them knew how literal that storm would be. 1 hour after the Reverend's departure, gunfire shattered the peace. The first shot came through the window, missing Clara's head by inches. Silas threw her to the floor, covering her body with his own as more bullets tore through the walls. "Stay down." He grabbed his rifle. "Do not move until I come back for you." "Silas, no. These are Thornton's men. I have to stop them." He kissed her forehead quickly. "I love you. Now survive." Then he was gone out the door and into the darkness. Clara lay on the floor, heart pounding, listening to the sounds of battle outside. Gunshots, shouting, the terrible sounds of men fighting and dying. She remembered the Colt that Silas had given her, the weapon he had taught her to use. She crawled across the floor and retrieved it from the drawer where she kept it, her hands steady despite her terror. If anyone came through that door, she would be ready. The door burst open. Edgar Thornton stood in the entrance, a pistol in his hand and blood on his face. "Hello, wife of Blackwood." He smiled, a terrible expression. "Your wedding day is about to become a funeral. Get out, or what you will shoot me." He laughed. "You are just a woman, Clara. You do not have the courage to pull that trigger." Clara remembered everything Silas had taught her, about staying calm, about breathing, about waiting for the right moment. She waited. Edgar stepped closer, confident that she was bluffing. She fired. The bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He screamed, dropping his weapon, clutching at the wound. Clara was on her feet in an instant, kicking his pistol away, training her Colt on his head. "Do not move," she said, her voice ice cold, "or the next one goes between your eyes." The door opened again and Silas appeared, blood running down his arm, but still standing still, fighting. He took in the scene, Clara standing over Edgar with a smoking gun, and something like pride flashed across his face. "4 of them outside," he reported. "All down. Is he the last?" "He is the last." "Good." Silas moved to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "What do you want to do with him?" Before Clara could answer, another voice came from outside. "Put down your weapons." A man stepped into the doorway, tall, around 35, with cold eyes but a weary expression. Jake Thornton, Edgar's older brother. "Jake?" Edgar's voice was high with panic. "What are you doing here?" "Cleaning up your mess." Jake looked at Silas and Clara, then back at his wounded brother. "Father has been arrested. His illegal dealings finally caught up with him. The bank will be seized, and the Thornton name will be worthless by morning." "What are you talking about?" Edgar struggled to sit up, still clutching his shoulder. "I gave the evidence to the judge myself." Jake's voice held no emotion. "The fraudulent loans, the forged documents, the threats against people who could not pay. All of it. You betrayed our own father. I stopped a criminal." Jake turned to Clara. "The mortgage he claimed to hold on your grandmother's house does not exist. It never did. Your home is yours free and clear." Clara felt her legs weaken with relief, but she kept her weapon trained on Edgar. "Why are you helping us?" she demanded. "Because not all Thorntons are monsters." Jake's eyes flickered to Silas. "And because you two deserve a chance at the happiness that men like my father and brother would destroy." He gestured to his men, who entered to take Edgar into custody. "My brother will face justice for what he did here tonight. I will ensure it." As they dragged Edgar away, still screaming threats and curses, Jake paused at the door. "I am sorry," he said quietly, "for everything my family has done to both of you." Then he was gone, and Silas and Clara were alone again. The storm had passed, but they both knew this was not truly the end. 2 days later, as Clara tended Silas's wounds and they began to settle into their married life, Cornelius Thornton escaped from custody. He appeared at their cabin without warning, wild-eyed and desperate, a pistol shaking in his hands. "You ruined everything," he snarled at Clara. "My son betrayed me because of you. My empire is crumbling because of you. You will die for what you have done." Clara faced him alone. Silas was checking traps at the far end of their property, too far to help. She could have begged, could have pleaded for her life, could have cowered in fear like the helpless woman Cornelius expected her to be. Instead, she stood tall. "Do it then," she said, her voice steady. "If you are going to kill me, then do it. Hurry up." Cornelius hesitated, surprised by her defiance. "You think I will not? I think you are a coward who has always let others do your dirty work. I think you are terrified of what Silas will do to you when he finds my body. And I think you know deep down that killing me will not save you from the destruction you brought upon yourself. Shut up. You wanted me to be weak, to be afraid, to submit." Clara took a step toward him, and he actually backed away. "But I am not the girl you tried to trap anymore. I am Clara Blackwood, and I am not afraid of you." The gun trembled in Cornelius's hands. And in that moment of hesitation, Silas appeared behind him and brought the butt of his rifle down on the old man's skull. Cornelius crumpled to the ground unconscious. Silas gathered Clara into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. When I saw that gun pointed at you," his voice was ragged, "I knew you would come." Clara pulled back to look at his face. "I just needed to keep him talking until you did. You told him to do it, to hurry up." Silas shook his head in disbelief. "You are either the bravest woman alive or the most insane." "Perhaps both." She smiled despite the tears on her cheeks. "But I meant what I said. I am not afraid anymore. Of him or anyone else." Silas kissed her, then, deep and desperate, a man who had come too close to losing everything he loved. "Never frighten me like that again," he murmured against her lips. "I cannot promise that." Clara touched his face gently. "But I can promise I will always fight. For you, for us, For our future." Behind them Cornelius groaned, but did not wake. Jake Thornton arrived within the hour to collect his father and ensure there would be no more escapes. This time the storm was truly over, and Silas and Clara Blackwood could finally begin their life together. Justice came swiftly for the Thornton family. Cornelius Thornton was tried before a judge from Helena, far from the influence he had once wielded in Pinewood Creek. The evidence Jake had gathered was overwhelming: forged documents, fraudulent loans, threats against dozens of families who could not pay debts that had been artificially inflated. When the full scope of his crimes became clear, even those who had once feared his power turned against him. He was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. He would die there, though no one knew that yet. Edgar received 5 years for his role in the conspiracy and for the attack on the Blackwood cabin. As they led him away in chains, he turned to look at Clara one last time, his eyes filled with impotent rage. She did not flinch, did not look away, simply stood beside her husband and watched the man who had tried to destroy her life disappear into the confines of a prison wagon. "It is over," Silas said quietly, his arm around her shoulders. "Yes." Clara leaned into his warmth. "It is finally over." But what surprised them both was what happened next. As they walked through the main street of Pinewood Creek after the trial, preparing to return to their mountain home, something unexpected occurred. Doc Harris, the elderly physician who had served the town for 30 years, approached them. He was a man of 60 with white hair and kind eyes, and he had always been respected for his integrity. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, extending his hand, "I owe you an apology." Silas looked at the offered hand with suspicion. "For what?" "For believing the stories, for assuming the worst about you without ever taking the time to learn the truth." The doctor's voice was sincere. "I have heard what happened at your cabin, how you defended your wife, how she defended herself, and I have heard how the Thorntons manufactured lies to destroy both of you. People believe what they want to believe. Yes, they do, and I believed wrong." Doc Harris kept his hand extended. "I am asking for the chance to start over, to know the real Silas Blackwood, not the monster from the stories." For a long moment Silas simply stared at him. Then slowly he reached out and shook the doctor's hand. "That is a start," he said gruffly. More townspeople approached as the day went on. Some offered apologies. Others simply nodded in acknowledgement, a small gesture but meaningful from people who had crossed the street to avoid Silas for years. Mrs. Patterson, the gossip who had spread so many rumors, actually broke down in tears. "I am so sorry," she sobbed to Clara. "I talked about you like you were trash when all you were doing was following your heart. Can you ever forgive me?" Clara thought about all the whispered conversations, the knowing looks, the judgment she had endured. She thought about how easy it would be to hold on to that anger, to let it poison her new happiness. Then she thought about Silas, who had spent 12 years believing he was a monster because one frightened woman had run away and spread stories. Holding on to grudges only hurt the person holding them. "I forgive you," Clara said. "But perhaps in the future you might consider that there are always 2 sides to every story." Mrs. Patterson nodded vigorously, wiping her eyes. "I will. I promise I will." As they finally made their way out of town and began the climb back to their cabin, Clara reflected on how much had changed. A month ago she had been alone and ignorant, trapped by rules that no longer served her, and threatened by a man who saw her as property to be acquired. Now she was married to a man who loved her, completely respected by a town that had once shunned her husband, and free in a way she had never imagined possible. "What are you thinking about?" Silas asked as they walked through the pine forest. "About how strange life is, how the worst moments can lead to the best outcomes if we have the courage to keep moving forward." "That sounds like wisdom. It sounds like something a woman learns when she climbs a mountain in the dark to ask a stranger to teach her about life." Clara smiled up at him. "Thank you, Silas." "For what?" "For being patient with me, for seeing who I could become instead of dismissing who I was, for giving me the chance to choose my own path." Silas stopped walking and turned to face her. In the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees, his gray eyes were soft in a way few people ever saw. "You are the one who did the choosing," he said. "You climbed that mountain. You knocked on that door. You looked at me and decided not to run." He cupped her face in his large hands. "I spent 12 years convinced I was unlovable. You proved me wrong in 3 weeks. If anyone should be grateful, it is me." He kissed her, then gentle and sweet, a promise of all the years to come. "Let us go home," he said when they finally parted. "Yes." Clara took his hand. "Let us go home." The months that followed were the happiest of Clara's life. She learned to live on the mountain, to cook over a wood stove, to preserve food for the long winters, to read the weather in the clouds and the behavior of the animals. Silas taught her to hunt and trap, to identify edible plants, to navigate the forest trails even in darkness. She also learned to be a wife in every sense of the word. Their physical relationship deepened with time and practice. What had once required careful preparation became natural, even easy. Clara discovered that her body was capable of pleasures she had never imagined, and Silas proved to be a devoted student of her responses, always attentive, always seeking new ways to bring her joy. But it was not just the physical intimacy that bound them together. It was the conversations by the fire on long winter nights, the shared laughter over small mishaps, the comfortable silences of two people who no longer needed words to communicate. The way Silas would sometimes look at her across the cabin with such wonder in his eyes, as though he still could not believe she was real. "You are staring again," Clara would say. "I am admiring my wife. Is that not allowed?" "It is definitely allowed, encouraged even." 6 months after their wedding, Clara began to notice changes in her body. A persistent nausea in the mornings, a sensitivity in her breasts, a weariness that seemed to settle into her bones. She said nothing at first, wanting to be certain before she raised Silas's hopes. But when she missed her second monthly cycle, she knew the truth could no longer be denied. She told him on a quiet evening as they sat together before the fire after dinner. "Silas, I need to tell you something." He looked up from the rifle he was cleaning, immediately alert to the seriousness in her tone. "What is wrong? Are you ill?" "Not ill." Clara took a deep breath. "I believe I am with child." The rifle clattered to the floor. Silas stared at her, his face frozen in an expression of shock. Then slowly he rose from his chair and crossed to where she sat. He knelt before her, his hands trembling as he placed them on her still flat stomach. "A child." His voice was barely a whisper. "Our child." "Yes." Clara placed her hands over his. "You are going to be a father." For a long moment Silas did not move, did not speak. Clara could see the emotions warring across his face, joy and fear and disbelief and hope all tangled together. Then the tears came. Silas Blackwood, the man everyone called a monster, the veteran who had survived wars and wilderness and 12 years of solitude, wept like a child. Clara held him as he cried, stroking his hair, murmuring words of comfort. She understood what this meant to him. A man who had believed himself unlovable now had a wife who adored him. A man who had resigned himself to dying alone now had a family growing inside the woman he cherished. "I do not deserve this," he finally said, his voice rough. "I do not deserve any of this." "That is not for you to decide." Clara lifted his face to meet her eyes. "You spent 12 years punishing yourself for something that was never your fault. Rebecca ran because she was afraid, not because you did anything wrong. It is time to stop carrying that guilt, Silas. It is time to let yourself be happy. What if I fail? What if I am a terrible father? You will not fail. I know this because I have seen who you truly are. Patient, gentle, protective, willing to learn from your mistakes." Clara smiled through her own tears. "Our child will be the luckiest child in Montana because they will have you as their father." Silas pulled her into his arms, holding her as though she were made of glass. "I love you," he said. "I love you so much it terrifies me." "Good," Clara laughed softly. Because I love you exactly that much too." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the autumn and into winter. Clara grew larger, her body changing to accommodate the new life within her. Silas became even more protective than before, insisting on doing any task that might strain her hovering whenever she climbed stairs or ventured outside. "I am pregnant, not dying," Clara reminded him more than once. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. Not my wife, not with my child." His jaw was set with familiar stubbornness. "You will rest. You will be careful. You will let me help you. And if I refuse, then I will carry you everywhere until the baby arrives." He probably would have done it too. Clara learned to accept his attentions with good grace, understanding that they came from a place of love and fear, the fear of a man who had lost everything once and could not bear to lose anything again. As her belly swelled, they began to prepare for the child's arrival. Silas built a cradle from mountain oak, carving intricate designs into the headboard. Clara sewed tiny garments from soft fabric purchased during their rare trips to town. They discussed names, argued playfully over whether the baby would be a boy or girl, and spent long hours imagining what their child might be like. "If it is a daughter," Clara said one evening, "I want her to grow up knowing she can be anything she chooses. I do not want her raised with the same restrictions I endured." "She will learn to shoot and hunt and track," Silas agreed. "And she will learn to read and think for herself. No daughter of mine will be kept ignorant. And if it is a son, then he will learn that true strength is not about dominance or control. It is about protecting those who need protection and respecting those who deserve respect." Silas placed his hand on Clara's stomach, feeling the flutter of movement within. "He will learn to be a good man, the kind of man I wish I had known when I was young." "You are a good man now." "I am trying to be." He smiled, a rare expression that still made Clara's heart skip. "You make me want to be better. You and this child." Winter settled over the mountain with familiar ferocity. Snow piled high around the cabin, and the nights grew long and cold. But inside their home warmth prevailed, the fire burning steady, the love between them growing stronger with each passing day. Doc Harris made the journey up the mountain twice during Clara's pregnancy, checking on her progress and assuring them that all was proceeding normally. "Strong heartbeat," he reported after listening with his stethoscope. "Good position. I see no reason to expect any complications." "When will the baby come?" Silas asked, his face a mask of barely contained anxiety. "Spring most likely, late March or early April." The doctor smiled reassuringly. "First babies often take their time. Nature knows what it is doing." But when March arrived and Clara's pains began, nothing about the delivery was easy. The labor started before dawn, waking Clara from a restless sleep. Silas immediately sent word to Doc Harris in town, then settled in to support his wife through what would become the longest day of his life. 12 hours passed, then 18, then 24. Clara labored through the pain with a determination that awed Silas. She did not scream or curse or blame him for her suffering. She simply breathed and rested and pushed again, her face pale and slick with sweat, her grip on his hand never wavering. "The baby is large," Doc Harris told Silas during a brief break from the bedroom, "like its father, and Mrs. Blackwood is small. It is taking longer than I would like, but she is strong. She will manage. If it comes to a choice between saving my wife or saving the child, save my wife." Silas's voice was raw. "I cannot lose her. Do you understand? I cannot." "Let us pray it does not come to that." The doctor placed a hand on Silas's shoulder. "Have faith, both in your wife and in the Lord." Finally, as dawn broke on the second day, Clara's screams changed pitch. A final tremendous push, a moment of agonizing pressure, and then the sound that Silas would remember for the rest of his life. A baby crying. "It is a girl," Doc Harris announced, holding up the squalling infant. "Healthy and strong." Clara collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted beyond measure, but her face was radiant with joy as the doctor placed the baby in her arms. "Look at her," she breathed. "Oh, Silas, look at her." Silas approached the bed on trembling legs. His daughter was red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect, with a tuft of blonde hair like her mother, and eyes that Wood he somehow knew turn gray like his own. "She is beautiful," he managed, his voice breaking. "Like her mother. She has your jaw." Clara traced the baby's tiny features with one finger. "And your stubbornness, I think. She certainly took her time arriving. What will we call her?" Clara had thought about this for months. She had considered family names, nature names from books she had read. But in the end only one word seemed right. "Grace," she said, "because she is the greatest grace I have ever received. The grace of love, the grace of family, the grace of a second chance at life." Grace. Silas tested the name on his tongue. Grace Blackwood. Yes. It is perfect. He reached out one massive finger, and the tiny hand wrapped around it with surprising strength. Silas stared at that grip, at this impossible miracle of life that he had helped create, and felt something shift inside him. For 12 years he had believed himself a monster, unlovable, destined to die alone. Now he had a wife who adored him, a daughter who would grow up knowing only his protection and love, and a future that stretched before him full of possibility. "Thank you," he whispered to Clara, to Grace, to whatever power had brought them all together. "Thank you for this gift." The years that followed were not without challenges. There were harsh winters and lean seasons, times when game was scarce and they worried about making it to spring. There were illnesses that swept through the territory, touching even their isolated mountain home. There were moments of fear and doubt, and the ordinary struggles that come with building a life and raising a family. But through it all, Silas and Clara faced each challenge together. Grace grew from a baby to a toddler, to a young girl fierce and independent like her mother, strong and quiet like her father. She learned to read before she was 4, to shoot before she was 6, to track deer through the forest before she was 8. 2 years after Grace Thomas arrived a thoughtful boy who preferred books to hunting, but had his father's stubborn determination. Then 2 years after Thomas the twins came, Emma and Elizabeth, identical in appearance, but vastly different in temperament. Emma was wild and adventurous. Elizabeth was calm and contemplative. The cabin expanded as the family grew. Silas built new rooms onto the original structure, creating a home that could accommodate 6 people and all the chaos that came with 4 children. They made trips to town more frequently now, needing supplies and connections to the outside world. And gradually the people of Pinewood Creek came to accept the Blackwood family as part of their community. Silas was still quiet and imposing, but people no longer crossed the street to avoid him. They nodded in greeting, exchanged pleasantries about the weather, sometimes even invited him to share a drink at the saloon. The stories about the monster on the mountain faded, replaced by new stories about the man who had saved his wife from the Thornton conspiracy, the father who brought his children to town for candy and picture books. Clara became a fixture in the community as well. She helped other young mothers navigate the challenges of pregnancy and childbirth, sharing the knowledge she had gained from her own experiences. She taught several women to read quietly and without fanfare, giving them tools their own upbringings had denied them. "You have changed this town," Mrs. Patterson told her one afternoon, years after their initial reconciliation. "You and that husband of yours." "We have not changed anything. People simply learned to see us clearly." "No, dear. You gave us a reason to look." The older woman smiled. "You showed us what real courage looks like, what real love looks like. That matters more than you know." 10 years after their wedding, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Clara stood on the porch of their expanded home and watched her family. Grace, now 10 years old, was practicing her rifle technique with Silas, her small face set with concentration. Thomas, 7, sat on the steps reading a book about explorers lost in worlds far from their mountain home. The 4-year-old twins were playing some complicated game of their own invention in the front yard, their laughter ringing through the pine trees. Clara placed a hand on her stomach, where no new life grew. She was content with 4 children, grateful for the family she had built with a man she loved more with each passing year. You look thoughtful." She turned to find Silas approaching, having left Grace to practice on her own for a moment. "I am thinking about how different everything turned out from what I expected. Good different or bad different? The best kind of different." Clara leaned into him as he wrapped an arm around her waist. 10 years ago, I was standing in a general store watching you through a window, terrified of my own feelings. Now I am standing on a mountain surrounded by our children, married to the man I love more than life itself. That is quite a journey. The best journeys always are." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their children, listening to the sounds of the mountain, breathing in the scent of pine and wood smoke and home. Then a figure appeared on the trail below. A woman climbing alone, her progress slow and uncertain. Silas tensed immediately, his protective instincts on full alert. But Clara placed a calming hand on his arm. "Wait," she said. "Let us see who it is." As the figure drew closer, details became visible. Gray hair streaked through what had once been auburn, aging her beyond her 44 years. A thin frame, almost frail from illness. And a face that Clara did not recognize, but Silas clearly did. He went very still. "Rebecca," he said the name carrying the weight of 12 years of pain. Rebecca, the woman who had run screaming from their wedding bed. The woman whose terror had convinced Silas he was a monster. The woman who had vanished from his life and left only stories and shame behind. She stopped at the edge of the clearing, her eyes taking in the expanded cabin, the playing children, the family that Silas had built without her. "Silas," her voice was thin, trembling. "May I speak with you?" Clara felt Silas's muscles tense beneath her hand. She could not imagine what he was feeling in this moment, confronted with the ghost of his greatest failure. "You have already said enough," he replied, his voice carefully flat. 12 years ago you said more than enough." "I know." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "I know, and that is why I am here, to tell you how sorry I am, to beg your forgiveness for what I did to you." "Why now, after all this time?" "Because I have been sick." Rebecca touched her chest. "Consumption. The doctors say I do not have long, and I could not die with this weight on my soul." Clara watched her husband's face, saw the war of emotions playing across his features, anger and pain and the distant memory of love, all tangled together in ways that only he could understand. "What do you want from me?" Silas asked finally. "Nothing you do not wish to give. I only want you to know the truth." Rebecca took a shaky breath. "That night, our wedding night, I was terrified. But not of you. Never of you. You screamed. You ran. Because I was ignorant." Tears streamed down her weathered cheeks. "Because no one had ever taught me what to expect. Because I was a foolish girl who let fear control her actions. I saw you and I imagined pain, and I panicked. You told everyone I was a monster. I told my sister I was scared, and she told others, and the story grew with each telling until it became something I never intended." Rebecca wrapped her arms around herself. "I tried to correct it. I truly did. But by then you were gone up on this mountain and the damage was done. The damage is not undone by an apology. I know. Nothing can undo 12 years of pain. All I can do is tell you the truth. I was wrong. You were never a monster, Silas. You were a good man who deserved better than what I gave you." She turned her gaze to Clara, who had remained silent through the exchange. "And you must be his wife, the one who was brave enough to see what I could not. I am Clara Blackwood. He is lucky to have you." Rebecca's smile was sad but genuine. "I have heard the stories. How you climbed this mountain alone to find him. How you faced down the Thorntons. How you built this family together." She looked at the children, at the home, at the life that could have been hers. He deserved this. He always deserved this. Clara considered the woman before her. It would have been easy to hate her, easy to resent the pain she had caused the man Clara loved, easy to send her away with harsh words and old grievances. But Clara had learned something important in her years with Silas. Holding on to anger only poisoned the person holding it, And this woman, dying and alone, had climbed a mountain to make amends for a mistake she had made half a lifetime ago. That required courage. "Thank you for coming," Clara said quietly. "Silas needed to hear this. He has carried the weight of your rejection for too long. Will you forgive me?" Rebecca looked between them, hope and fear mingled in her expression. Silas was silent for a long moment. Clara did not speak, understanding that this was his choice to make. Finally he sighed, a sound that seemed to release years of tension. "I forgave you a long time ago, Rebecca. I had to, or the bitterness would have destroyed me." He looked at Clara, at their children, at the life he had built. "And I am grateful to you in a strange way. Grateful. If you had not run, I would never have come to this mountain, would never have been here when Clara needed someone, would never have built this family." Silas met Rebecca's eyes. "Your fear drove me into 12 years of solitude, but that solitude prepared me for something I never expected. It made me patient, careful, determined to be gentle with anyone brave enough to trust me. So you do not hate me. I feel sorry for you." His voice held no malice. "You ran from something that could have been beautiful, and you spent the rest of your life alone while I found everything I ever wanted." Rebecca nodded slowly, tears still falling. "Then I will die in peace knowing you have found happiness." She turned to leave, her shoulders bowed with illness and emotion. "Wait." Clara's voice stopped her. Rebecca looked back. "Stay for dinner," Clara offered. "You have climbed a long way. Rest before you return." "I could not impose." "You are not imposing. You are closing a chapter that needed to be closed." Clara glanced at Silas, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Let us end this story the right way, with forgiveness instead of bitterness." Rebecca hesitated, then nodded gratefully. That evening a strange gathering took place in the Blackwood cabin. Silas and Clara, their 4 children, and the woman who had once almost destroyed everything sharing a meal around a table built for family. The conversation was awkward at first, stilted with years of unspoken history. But gradually, as the fire crackled and the children's innocent questions filled the silences, something shifted. Rebecca told stories of the years she had spent traveling, searching for something she could never quite find. She spoke of regret and loneliness of watching others build families while she remained apart, too afraid of her own fear to try again. Silas spoke hesitantly at first of the years on the mountain, of the darkness that had sometimes threatened to consume him, of the night Clara had appeared at his door and changed everything. And Clara spoke of courage, of the kind that climbed mountains in the darkness, and the kind that climbed them in daylight to seek forgiveness. When Rebecca departed the next morning, she embraced Clara first. "Take care of him," she whispered. "He deserves to be loved. I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure he knows it." Then Rebecca turned to Silas, hesitating. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward an embrace. He nodded, and she hugged him briefly, the embrace of 2 people who might have loved each other once, but had found their paths leading elsewhere. "Be happy, Silas," Rebecca said. "That is all I ever wanted for you, even when my fear made me do the opposite. Be at peace, Rebecca. That is all I want for you." She smiled a genuine expression, despite the illness visible in her features, and began the long walk back down the mountain. They would later learn that she died 3 months after that visit peacefully in a sanatorium in California. But the closure she had sought and given outlived her by decades. That night, after the children were asleep, Silas and Clara sat together by the fire as they had countless times before. "How do you feel?" Clara asked softly. "Strange. Relieved. Sad." Silas stared into the flames. "For 12 years I imagined what I would say to her if I ever saw her again. All the anger, all the accusations. And when she finally stood before me, all I felt was pity. Because you have healed. Because you healed me." He turned to look at her, his gray eyes soft in the firelight. "Everything good in my life traces back to you, Clara. Every joy, every hope, every moment of peace." "That is not true. You built this life too. You became the man I fell in love with long before I arrived." "No, I became the man you believed I could be. There is a difference." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night when I asked why you had climbed the mountain? I said I wanted you to teach me. You wanted knowledge, power, understanding." Silas smiled. "What you gave me in return was something I had stopped believing I deserved. You looked at a monster and saw a man, and in seeing me clearly, you allowed me to become him. You were always that man, Silas. I simply refused to accept any other version." He pulled her into his lap, holding her close, his face buried in her hair. "I love you, Clara Blackwood. More than words can express, more than actions can prove, more than I knew it was possible to love anything." "I love you too." She tilted her face up to kiss him. "My husband, my teacher, my mountain man. Your monster. Never that." Clara traced the familiar lines of his face. "You were never that. Not to me." Outside the cabin, the mountain stood sentinel as it had for millennia. Stars wheeled overhead in their eternal patterns. The pine trees whispered secrets to the wind. And inside, two people who had found each other against all odds held tight to the love they had built, grateful for every moment, every challenge, every joy that had brought them to this place. In the years that followed, the Blackwood family continued to grow and thrive. Grace became a skilled hunter and tracker, eventually marrying a young man from town who was brave enough to ask Silas for her hand and patient enough to pass the tests her father set for him. They built a cabin of their own on the lower slopes close enough to visit often. Thomas pursued his love of learning, eventually traveling east to attend university, becoming a doctor who returned to serve the communities of western Montana. He never married, content with his books and his patience and his regular visits to the mountain home where he had been raised. The twins took divergent paths as different as their personalities. Emma married an Army officer and traveled to distant postings, sending letters filled with adventures and occasional worries. Elizabeth became a teacher in Pinewood Creek, the town that had once whispered about her parents now sending their children to learn at her feet. And through it all, Silas and Clara remained the center, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They grew old together on their mountain. Silas's hair turned fully gray, then white. Clara's beauty mellowed into something even more lovely, the lines on her face mapping a life fully lived. They slowed down, took more rests, relied more on their children for the heavy work of mountain living. But they never stopped touching, never stopped talking, never stopped looking at each other with the same wonder that had sparked between them on a night when a frightened young woman knocked on a lonely man's door. On Clara's 70th birthday, with all 4 children and 7 grandchildren gathered at the cabin for celebration, Silas raised a toast. "To my wife," he said, his voice cracked with age but steady with love, "who climbed a mountain in the darkness because she was brave enough to choose her own path, who looked at a man everyone called a monster and saw something worth loving, who gave me children and grandchildren and more happiness than I ever dared to dream." He turned to look at her, the woman he had loved for nearly 50 years. "Thank you, Clara Blackwood, for everything, for always." Clara smiled, her eyes bright with tears. "Thank you, Silas, for waiting, for being there when I needed you, for teaching me that love is not about perfection. It is about patience and trust and choosing each other every single day." "I would choose you again," he said softly. 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times, in every life. "So would I." She reached out to take his hand. "In every life." Brave enough to knock on the door, brave enough to say, "Teach me," and trust what comes next.